when I'm writing, I've found that it helps to plot out chapter by chapter now. I didn't used to do that. I used to just kind of very vaguely sketch out a book, and I would do like character arcs and stuff like that, and kind of hit the big plot points, and then I would just kind of just start writing. But I've realized since that plotting it out chapter by chapter kind of eliminates any writer's block kind of issues. I don't have, if I always know what's coming next, even if I change it, it always feels like I have a safety net. Like I have something, I don't need to worry about what I'm going to write that day. I know exactly, I had it all planned out. And like I said, that might completely change. It might change while I'm writing. It could change, a few days earlier. I might have thrown in a plot point that kind of negates something. But yeah, it just feels like there's like a comfort level there that makes writing less of a scary prospect. And I've written 15 books now, and still every day is writing is a terrifying prospect. So yeah, that's one of the little things I've learned that kind of helps me. And I know other people are kind of seat of their pantsers and they just start writing, when that fully terrifies me. So I don't know if I'll ever try that, but yeah, so it's one of those things that I just sort of have picked up along the way. And so long story short, the third book, which right now is called Happily Ever After, and it won't be, that is fully like plotted out. And so I just need to get through the ending.
I forced myself once to do a full pantser exercise. Well, I'm going to skip the outline this time. I'm just going to sit down and do this, and fine. But the revision took forever. And ultimately, I ended up writing an outline after the fact to help me keep track. So there was no skipping that step. It just came a little bit later in the process.
I've had that same thing happen where I get through something and it doesn't feel right, and then I have to go back and outline it anyway. And like that's when I started doing this. And it was also an effort to find problems like ahead of time. There's so many things that feel like they're going to work when you're thinking of them in your head, and then you get them on paper and it just doesn't, like there's just something that's off about it. And it's so much easier to find those problems when you're just outlining versus when you're 300 pages in and you're like, none of this works, and it didn't work from page 10, and this is a problem. So yeah, I'd much rather take a little time early than end up rewriting the entire book, which has happened.
How much time are we talking just spent outlining?
I mean, honestly, the most time comes with just daydreaming and thinking about it, and like sending myself notes. I email myself so many just random emails with the subject line notes that are just either like 2 sentences or like maybe 10 bullet points or whatever of something that I'm thinking about. So like there's probably a few weeks in there, and it usually comes when I'm finishing up something else. And then I will sit down, like the actual plotting basically only takes like a day, if everything goes well, like just sitting down and like outlining the whole book. But yeah, it's because the real work happened way in advance, and just letting it kind of percolate in my head.
Do you write a chapter while you're outlining a couple of chapters just to get a sense of it, or do you wait with discipline until you have the whole outline, a full plan, and then, okay, day one, let me start?
It's been that way since I've started plotting it out chapter by chapter, yeah, where I will wait. And it's especially going back to something I didn't really mention, that so Once Upon Another Time is a sequel, but it takes place 12 years after Half Upon a Time. So there's no, some of the characters show up, but you don't need to have read the first series. That actually came up in my head though, because it was fun to return to that world, and it felt like a natural progression, and I could kind of just step back into it without having much. I could kind of return to that writing style very easily, and it was fun to do so. So I was less worried about that when I was writing, because I'd already done 3 books of it, even though the voice changes and the characters, because my narration, it's like third person omniscient, but I delve into the individual characters in. So I do a chapter of Lena and then a chapter of Jin, so you get into their thoughts as it's going. So the individual voices definitely are different, but it did still feel like kind of putting on a nice warm hoodie that you hadn't worn in a while. Very comforting.
Well, I'm gonna ask some in the weeds questions just because I'm interested. When you sit down, what do you have before you start outlining? You know more or less who your character is going to be. Do you have some idea of what the progression of the journey is going to be? How much do you have before you write the first thing?
So I would generally start, like, to get really far back, I will start with like an idea of the Thumbelina story, but as a giant. So instead of having like a 5-inch tall girl, we're going to deal with a girl who fits in very easily with human society, if a little tall for her age, but does not fit in with giant society. So that would be where it starts. And then I would I would kind of build up that world in my head, and think about what that would mean and what other characters I might want to play with and where it might go, who the villains would be, and like the themes. So that kind of stuff would all happen just entirely in my head. And then I would start writing out synopses of the books, however many books I planned out. And they would get, the first book is always it's always much longer and more detailed. And then I kind of get more vague as the second and third book go. But the big plot points are there. And then from there, I would take all of that and do a chapter by chapter outline, where it gets very specific. It covers like the character arc stuff, the big plot points, and generally everything that happens in a chapter. So after that point is when I would actually sit down and start writing. And I think I'm different from a lot of writers. I entirely just go by, I do a chapter at a time. So my chapters usually end up being about 5 pages in Word. And I try to write 2 chapters a day. So about 10 pages. And I never, whenever people talk about word count, I'm always completely baffled, because word count to me is either 0 or the final product, because I know I have to hit a certain amount of words, but I just kind of, for whatever reason in my head, it's just a chapter thing. So yeah, that's when I start writing and go through to the end, and then do like potentially 3 to 4 drafts, sometimes 6 or 7 when it's not going well. But yeah, generally that's the process.
Word count is a slippery slope, dangerous sometimes in terms of tracking. I mean, it's better than not tracking, because you can say, hey, I had a goal and I met it. But then if I'm revising and I see that, oh, I've got 200 extra words here that are not needed, this is garbage, let me cut that. And I think to myself, oh, you hit your word count that day, didn't you? Felt good that day. Let's take that out.
One of the reasons I like chapters too is because I love being cruel and ending chapters on cliffhangers and stuff, but that makes it so easy to pick up the next day. Apart from even having that chapter like plotted out, it's nice because you're feeling like you're dealing with something immediate and there's a resolution to that, and then as you go into the next chapter, it just kind of makes it just a little more, it's just another little trick, and it's one of those tricks that works out well for me with writing it, and hopefully keeps people reading it. So it's kind of a win-win. But yeah, I love cliffhangers. I love being cruel. Whenever kids tell me that like the books made them cry, I'm like, that's such a nice thing to say. Thank you. So honored.
The thought of you weeping has cheered me tremendously. I appreciate it.
Yes. Oh, it makes me just laugh maniacally too. But I mean, I would never like betray the kids and give them like a terrible ending. I'm not trying to like make them aware of how cruel the world is. I just want to write fun stories that like for the moment seems like they're going to go really badly, and then I mean they're fairy tales, they have to have some sort of happy ending, which is why I love the title for the third book of Happily Ever After, just because the whole book is going to be about entirely how it's not. It's very much like the second book ends in a very Empire Strikes Back sort of way. So it's fun.
Yeah, I was curious. Do you not feel compelled to make that second book a little bit darker just because that's the template that was set down for us?
Yes. And that's always something I have to both I embrace and also fight a little bit against, just trying not to be too cliche, but it always comes back to it. It's like it's such a classic trilogy to do a darker second book. And this one It's going to be it's definitely a little darker, but it's also I always try to ramp up the humor if I'm going to do anything that's slightly darker. Um, Tall Tales is sort of without spoiling the first book, a greater threat sort of emerges, and Lena discovers some stuff about giants herself, and where and how they came about, that sort of puts a darker spin on things, and she has to learn like how to deal with that with her own kind of newfound confidence after the first book. So there's some darker elements there, whereas things happen to Jin that just make him basically an entirely comedic character for like the first half of the book, which was just a joy to write. And I can't really give it away, but he's yeah, it was just pure fun. So I always try to balance things just so no one's like openly weeping for the entire book. I definitely want some jokes in there.
You know, I had something similar when I wrote my Banneker Bones trilogy, available now, esteemed audience. The second book, I thought, well, this would be the darker one, and it was. But then the third book was even darker yet. Oh no, stop it! We did that already. But nope, it just until we get out of it. I'm like, no, it just I want to ramp up that conflict even more. Turns out.
I mean, Return of the Jedi had some pretty dark moments. I don't know. All of my storytelling always goes back to Star Wars and like Disney movies, but it's that thing where it's like anything you experience when you were young is like the golden perfection or whatever. The I don't know. It's we kind of get so influenced by what we experience when we're growing that it's almost impossible to escape.